David, come up. It's an honor to have you at We Are Not Saints.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. That's the nicest you have ever been. Thank you for having me here. I was here last night and realized that you guys started this during a pandemic. And I just want to congratulate you on your courage and motivation to do that, and to see how this has become, obviously, everyone's, that's here's home group, which is just an amazing thing. So thank you, Brandon, Patrick, for asking me, and Patrick for hosting me, and Gary for coming up, and the nice people that tolerate me at dinner. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to, on November 1st, actually, tomorrow's my birthday, but on November 1st, I'll have 28 years. So, and I'm very grateful for that. And this is the story of how that happened. I actually was raised in the Western Territories, and was the little kid that you see actually depicted in movies, probably because I was the fat sissy boy that everyone picked on. I was the boys got, dodgeball, the dreaded dodgeball day where I had to be the first one out, because they were hitting the largest target, and I happened to be it. And so, it was a very torturous upbringing out there. I had a mother who had been raised with a little bit of money, and so she wore furs and diamonds and drove a Cadillac Coupe de Ville, and I feel like she impressed upon me a lot of things, more so than my dad. We went from kindergarten through 12th grade together, because we're a small community. I graduated with 150 people. We know each other, right? And so by the time I was 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, they knew there was something about me that was different. I knew there was something about me that was different, but I didn't know what it was, right? I thought that, I just was not athletic. And I thought that, I was really the kid who, let me get this back up here. The kid who was last in line running, PE was, it was just all a nightmare. So I did, in junior high, though, have a situation happen where we had a segregated community. And so my mother, to her credit, would take us. There was a country club, and I use that very loosely, in West Texas. But and so she would drive the Cadillac there, and we would play in the pool and whatever. And then she would come back through, and she would actually go to the east side of town, and she would get barbecue there because she knew it was the best barbecue. And it turns out her dad was the only butcher in Austin for many years, and so she knew steak and she knew meat and things like that. And so she kind of taught us to be unafraid of those things. But in junior high, we mixed our schools, and so suddenly the people who knew I was different, I met all these other kids, right? So I had lost weight, and it was junior high, and we were just coming of age. And so I had all these fast friends from the other side of town. And because my homosexual behavior was starting to happen, I did something with a friend one night, and he chose to tell the whole entire town. So I went from being popular for a minute to not being popular. But in that time frame, I had been introduced to a little bit of drinking and some, I don't know, it seems like you are using drugs pretty openly here, but outside issues. And so both sides of I was coming of age, and so both sides of my family realized that, and I was given all of these things, right? So I was able to learn how to chop outside issues, snort outside issues, drop outside issues, and so I took. So what I learned, and so I became the person who had all those things. I also looked older, and I was running around with a crowd because I had been ostracized or blacklisted for most people. And so I worked at a Pizza Hut. Yes, I did. And I made the best pizzas because I was always so smoking outside issues, so I would just make the best pizzas. But anyway, I was hanging out with this older crowd, and so there was the first wave of people coming in from the north, and they allowed me to buy things from them, which I in turn, because I have merchant blood in me, was able to turn around and perhaps make some money on that side there. It's like a side hustle. And so that's what I did. I hung out with this full-blooded Indian woman named Susie, and we drove around in her little Isuzu, and we drank Mad Dog 2020 and Boone's Farm and Strawberry Hill, all of it, right? After work at the Pizza Hut. And so people couldn't even keep up with us. They would try to go riding around with us, and we would just literally sit there eating sunflower seeds, watching them get sick on this, outside because they couldn't. She and I would just. Anyway, I hung out with older people. I became the person who had what you wanted, and that's where I became popular again. And for many years, I felt like I had to have something because it couldn't just be me, right? You wouldn't want to know me because, of course, I have all this shame and all this, stuff. And so it was what I had and what I showed up with. And that carried on for many, many years. But I left there, and really, I was the person who at lunch would go and smoke outside issues, go and try to do typing class until they tapped me on the shoulder and said, you need to join drama. You need to go join the drama class because you can't type, right? And so, and I'd go back to my car at the end of the day, and it literally would still be on, going because I had just gotten out of the car and walked away. It's still on, right? Because Anyway, I got to college. I didn't even realize I was going to college, I don't think. But the gift is that I was in honors classes, and I clubbed out of math and trig and I could do all that stuff, right? So they really didn't know what to do with me because I was actually academic, but also had a dark side to me. And so I remember my favorite teacher, I had actually baked some outside issues into some brownies and taken them to her class and people were literally lining up coming into the back room, and she let it happen. She was so cool. She drove a Trans Am, and she was a cool lady. But the next year she took me into her class, and she said, class, if you need anything at all, drugs or whatever, this is your person, right? And I thought she was just introducing me to her class until she said that, but she got me back for the situation. So anyway, I always adored her for that. Later, I was mortified, but later I thought that was great that she did that. But so I went to college, and when I went to college, I didn't have to hide that part of me, the homosexual part of me. And I was in Austin, and the bars were there, and I had perhaps a trust fund. And so, we started doing our thing. And so we had a new drug, we had a new disease, which really I was in that generation that didn't quite get touched by that as quickly. And so we were having a great time. And so I just continued the party, and I still was going to school. And so I graduated, and I did all that whole thing, but I was, meeting people and doing this whole Austin gay scene, Hippie Hollow, they have a circuit party there every year, and we had, you would just party all night the way through and go there in the morning and do that whole thing. So it was really a magical time. And so then, let's see what happened. Then I had started hanging out with younger and younger people because they were still partying. And the people I knew my age were getting married and getting out of school and going and doing jobs or whatever. So these kids were probably 5 years younger than me. And they taught me actually how to do things correctly. And so we had a whole series of ways of doing things. And of course, I was still an entrepreneur, let's say. And so so then there was a night where a dear friend of mine who I'd met in architecture school at UT was in town, and he and I just drank all day long. We just went to the bar. We're the only ones in the bar. The bartender was so bored with us, he was telling us jokes and whatever. And I decided that once I got home, I wanted to do a little bit of something and then go drink some more. Right? And so I didn't even see him, I didn't even see the cop behind me, right? It took blocks and blocks, he told me, for me to pull over, And so I was And I started saying all this crap. Anyway, I got arrested, right? I call it captured. And that was October 28th of 93. So they captured me because I never really, the part of the big book that talk about, trying to moderate, trying to change or whatever, I don't really remember trying to stop. It was just full force, full effect, right? I sent these little kids to Mexico one time and for this boxes of some things. And so they brought them back, and of course I had to try them because what kind of distributor are you if you don't try your thing first? And so I remember sitting at home and not feeling it, right? And so I got up to go to the restroom, and I literally couldn't walk. It was like kaboom, kaboom down the hallway, right? And so, of course, then you have to tell them they have to chop it down to use it. Anyway, I was a very good person. And so when it came to those things, right? So anyway, I got arrested. There were certain things in my pocket. That's the whole point of that I may or may not have had the script for. So anyway, I get arrested, and I remember the whole night. I remember, actually I sold furniture, and I remember walking by the sheriff on the next morning, and I had sold him a sofa. So I was like, oh, I can't let him see who I am, right? It's like he would care. So anyway, I was picked up, and I partied that weekend, right? It was like that night, I had 2 cocktails in my hands, and I was, ready to go again. And the person, actually my person who I got things from, she said, maybe you should slow down. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm out of jail. Why would I, it's Halloween. And so I remember seeing someone there, his name was R.A., and he told me that he had just found out that he was positive. And so, being the self-centered person that I am, I'm like, well, I just got arrested. So we had this little conversation on the outside. I remember being there talking to him about it, and then I never saw him again. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter. It was like I was just going through people, And so I was the last man standing that weekend. There's a lady that I know now. She sells me wallpaper. She and I were always the last 2 up in the morning. Everyone else is sleeping around us. I know some of you know what this feels like. And you're the last person there, right? And you're still doing it, and you're sitting at the table, and there's one other person or 2 other people that are right there with you. And I drank all the way through all of this. So that happened that weekend. And that Monday, I went to see my lawyer about the DWI, and it happened to be my cousin who happened to be sober. Now, is it God? Is it odd, or is it God that all came together that way? And so he asked me that Monday if I knew in my heart of hearts if I was an alcoholic. And I had to tell him yes, because I'd already started calling myself an alcoholic. In fact, when I was in the drunk tank, I told him I'm an alcoholic. And they're like, sent some lady to talk to me, right? And I'm like, no, I just need another cocktail, right? Literally thinking that I could get a cocktail for some reason, because I was so... Anyway, she's like, we don't do that here. And she's like, do you need any other thing? And I'm like, no, that's disappointing. Okay, I'll go back in there. And so, completely oblivious to what was really happening. So anyway, he asked me that. And at that time and that moment, I made a decision. And that decision was, he had asked me, did you expect your life to turn out this way? And I said, no. And he said, did your parents expect you to be this? And I said no, even though my mother was an alcoholic as well. And I said no. And so I made that decision that day. And that is my sobriety date, I'm happy to say. Now, I have not done any of this correctly or whatever, but that is my sobriety date. I made that decision, which it talks about making a decision around this. And so I had to go through the processing and all that stuff and see the judge and do all that. And for a long time I thought, I came into AA and I got sober. And that's not true. I made a decision around alcohol, and then I worked my way into AA through the system, and they taught me how to stay here with that decision, right? That's different than the story I was telling before. So, I went and got assessed, and, of course, there was this little thing that said, if you're an alcoholic, right? And so it says, have you ever drunk dialed? Have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? Well, of course, I moderated all those questions, right? And so I go in there, and he's like, well, you made 14 out of 16. And I'm like, B+. I'm good, right? And he's like, no, actually 4 to 5 means that you have an issue, and 5 to 10 means that you are an alcoholic, and anything over 10, you are full-blown 100% alcoholic. And I'm like, and I moderated that. And so anyway, I was being told all these things, and I finally made my way to a meeting. But what had happened, though, is that the alcohol and drugs had allowed me not to be the shy, fat, sissy boy, right? Even though everyone that saw me, knew that's what I was. And so I was back to that shy personality that I tried to cover up long ago, right? And I didn't like that. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be left with this boring personality, this shy, can't running from everything kind of personality. And so I did AA wrong. Like, I literally came in late and left early, and then wondered why you guys didn't know me and why you weren't asking who I was, right? And literally, I'm not giving you a chance at all. And so someone scooped me up. I did steps with her. She actually was a twin. I'm a twin. And she had a big car that said sober on the back of her car, very wealthy woman. And she took me through the steps. And I learned a lot about myself, right? I learned a lot about how I was showing up and all of that. But, your first 4-step is as good as it can be, right? There was still more to be revealed. And so it gave me enough that I had amends with my mother, and my mother was someone who drank every day. She was always drunk at night, so I created and worked through a morning relationship with her. So I would call and talk to her in the morning so that we could have a conversation. I made amends to my dad for taking him for granted for his money. I would literally ask for, I would spend all my money on. And my mother asked me one time, she's like, I didn't think you had enough money to be an alcoholic. I'm like, okay, well, I have you fooled, or, there's no way you would know, right? So anyway, in about 3 or 4 years in, I got the call that my mother had cancer. And so I went to Fort Worth. I was in Mexico, actually, at the time, and I came to see her, and, they sent her to Fort Worth for treatment, and I literally watched her. She smoked all her life. I mean, I probably was born needing nicotine, And so I watched her lie to the doctor and say that she didn't smoke, right? And so they put her on a ventilator, and I had to watch her suffer through that. And in order to get through that, I went to an AA meeting in Fort Worth. And I didn't know who those people were, and I told them that my mother was dying, and they stood with me, they hugged me, and I really didn't say really much in those meetings, but the people who heard me say it the first time, they always sat next to me. So I got through that. She did pass away, and watching someone pass away is miraculous. I've watched both my parents pass in sobriety, and so and it is one of those things where it's like the spirit is so strong that once it's gone, it's just a body. We're animals, really. And so I had that happen. And then I went into the desert years, the dry years of my sobriety, right? And so those years, and we've been told about this, is that you have misery return, right? I would cry in my cereal every morning, right? I'm like, what is wrong? What is wrong, right? And didn't have a sponsor, didn't work the steps, didn't know what the big book was, none of the program at all. And so I decided, well, maybe I should go to a meeting, right? And so I went to Northland, which is one of the oldest meetings in Austin, if not the oldest, and I heard this big, I was to the point where I couldn't understand what they were saying. I couldn't understand, but this man said, in your 7th year, you either go back out, kill yourself, or restart your program. And I didn't realize that you could restart your program without having gone back out. It just never dawned on me that you could do that. And so I went to Halloween in New Orleans. My twin brother was living in New Orleans. He was Catwoman that year. I was Penguin. My friend was Batman. And so we went, and I went to a meeting. He was a great Catwoman, by the way. And so it was so funny. A couple of times I went to meetings in New Orleans, and people would run up to me and go, they would say his name and hug me, and I'm like, it was like, we knew you needed to be in here. I'm like, oh, I'm not him. I'm his twin brother. So, but anyway, that's aside. But a man there in that meeting said that that no institution, principle, or person out there in the world had done more damage to himself than he had done to himself, that he had placed himself in that bathhouse. He had placed himself in that bar. He had spent that money. He said all that, and I hadn't realized I had never forgiven myself for being an alcoholic or turning out the way I did. And I cried during that meeting. I think it was probably the last time I ever cried. But anyway, and I went up to him and I said, what you said meant a lot to me. And my friend said, let's go. Batman said, we have to go. And I'm like, okay, fine, we left. And I don't know who that person is, but he changed my sobriety, right? And so the point of that is that, the big book is there, so the sponsorship is there, all those things are there, but it could be somebody in a meeting, it could be someone that says something that becomes part of your program, and this man did that for me. And I came back to Austin, I restarted my program at 7 years, and I'd always felt odd at the gay meetings. I always felt like I was that unattractive fat boy that no one wanted around in the gay meetings, and for some reason that all went away. And what I realized is that I had finally accepted all of me, good and bad. Right? And so I restarted my program, and that sponsor that I picked turned out to be the drag queen that I loved the most in the bars, right? And so back in the day, I had no idea. And so he actually helped me deconstruct my God, because I still had a Catholic, revengeful God. Now, I had been an altar boy. I had worn the little white dress. I had carried the burning purse. And none of those men touched me, so I was out of there. And so I dressed up for it, and it didn't happen. So, but I still had that revengeful God, right? So I had to deconstruct that God, and he had me write out, literally, if you were a God and had created something, what would you be to that? And I said nurturing and understanding and unconditional and all these things. And I wrote those down. And he literally just looked at me and pushed the page back to me and said, this is the God of your understanding. You can have this God, right? So that's the God I've had since that day. So I had to do that work. And then, let's see. So I restarted my program, but then I started my own company. Right? So I started my own company, and work became my higher power. And so I spent a year working weekends, doing all these things all the way through. This is a few years after that. And I ended up at the end of the year with awards, more money, because I own an award-winning design firm. So, but awards, money, whatever, published, and no one to share with. I remember driving over Mopac, which is our freeway, and thinking, there's no one to share this with, right? I'm all alone. And so I knew I had to get back. And so Rick, the friend who I went to architecture school with, had come back in the program. He had a desert dry period. And he had met this woman who was highly intelligent, and I was seeing changes in him. And so I sought out the group of people that he was seeing and talking to. And it turns out they were big book thumpers. They were old timers, and they had the book, and they were doing big book studies and doing all those things. And so I started doing that. I've been doing that for 15 years now, 20 years now. And so different big book studies and different times and all those things. And they had my information. They had told me to read the big book, and I would read a paragraph and I'd fall asleep. I'd read a paragraph and I'd fall asleep when I first started. And it's like, they're like, are you reading the big book? I'm like, absolutely, right? The same paragraph for months. And so we started on that. And what they taught me was, there's in the introduction, it talks about men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. It's the only normal life they know. And so they said, is alcohol an issue for you today? Do you turn to it? And I said, no. And they said, okay, well, you need to put your name in there, and you need to put in thinking or controlling. And so it reads, David likes to think because he likes the effect produced by his thinking, right? And so I started learning a new way to look at the book and to put myself in the book, right? And so I read the book that way with my sponsees, and I show them how that works and how it reads much more. So it's much more personal to me if I'm using the word David instead of the alcoholic, right? I can separate myself from that person. That's a 1930s person, right? I can still see myself in that. But if I use my name, then it becomes much more personal. And I like back to me. So the other thing is I was taught that, and I always thought that, someone asked the panel, and by the way, the panel was phenomenal tonight. I thought it was so excellent. Not just pretty faces, but really pretty minds. And so, I was taught that, I always thought that, step 4 and 5 and 8 and 9 is a spiritual awakening, and those are my favorites. But really, I've learned to understand and was taught to read 60 to 63 every day. And so that's the third step. And what that says to me is that, and by the way, if you haven't noticed, I qualify for this program in 1 and 2, so we're on to 3. But, what it says is that the only requirement is that we have to only requirement for this program is that we have to stop playing God, basically. It says self-will, and it says some other things, but basically we have to stop playing God. And it's the part where it talks about the actor in the show, right? So David likes to run the fill in the blank. I like to control fill in the blank, right? So if you put yourself in there and you start reading it, it actually gives you clues as to how your personality is going to show up. I can be kind and generous and giving if I want you to do something, or I can turn on a dime. I usually do this. It's like, I think you're going to act this way if I do this, and if you don't, this comes out, right? The monster comes out. Then I'm mean, and if I have any power, punishing. Love punishing. So, the next paragraph talks about self-delusion, self-seeking, if I can only manage it well, right? So step 3 is page after page about how I'm showing up as God in my life and in your life, right? It's just the last 3 paragraphs before you get to the third step. It talks about we now have to turn to God as an employer and all those things, right? So I focus on the point of me showing up as God, right? That's my character defect. That's the self-will. That's the whole thing that is causing my problem. Our problem is self, driven by 100 forms. Selfish, self-centered, Stephen. So that is the root of our trouble, right? And so, that is why I try to concentrate on today. I was taught to do the 4-step differently. I was taught to have other forms of self included, not just the 4 that are listed on that page. So self-delusion shows up, self-righteousness, self-reliance, self-pity, because it says driven by 100 forms of self-pity. So we go back and we look and see how many other forms of self are mentioned in the book. I need to put them in my part. And it reveals so much more if you go deeper into those forms of self in that column than what is actually the 4 afraid, self-centered, there's 4 there listed on the page there. But if you go deeper, you learn more about yourself, And ambition, it mentions ambition. To me, that's one of the key things, because it says, my ambition is what? To control, to keep you doing what I want you to do. And if you don't do it, it's like I don't even sometimes know that I have an agenda. I'm blind to that agenda, but if you don't do it, it's suddenly revealed to both of us, right? So, relieve me of the bondage of self. What does that really mean? If you were to walking away from yourself, I had my sponsor, tell me that we put our names on pieces of paper and we put them in the middle of the table at a coffee shop, and she said, get up and walk away, and we all walked away, and she said, look back at yourself, right? You have to leave yourself that much. You have to turn into something else that much. So the 4th step, getting into those other deeper things, I tell my sponsees that, we have the 4 columns with the deeper part in the self part, but then there's the fears about the situation. And so we write about that fear, and then we write about general fears, because it says fear is the corroding thread, right? But then we have sexual inventory. Well, I've told people, I'm like, well, if you're at the end of your life and you look back and there's a room of everyone you slept with, what does that look like? And some of my sponsees are like, well, can it be bigger than a room? So stadium. But it talks about relationships in that, the two parts of it, right? There's one about the harm we've done, and the other part is the ideal. And so, I have expanded that and talked to them about relationships in general. How can I move forward with relationship with fill in the blank, right? And all of those things, where have I brought harm to that, and what's my ideal situation with an employee? What is my ideal situation? And we let God direct that. So I've expanded that with them as a sexual inventory, but also as a relationship inventory in general. And then the other thing I was taught, and I don't hear very much anymore, on a full 4-step, and I was taught from the very beginning this, is that we have to do a gratitude list. Because it's not all bad, right? So we have to do a gratitude about that person, and that starts to transition us into the amends process, if we can look for good in that person. And then we have to do a gratitude list in general. I'm still here. I didn't expect to be here. I'm still here. It's really nice. So that is a full 4-step, the way I was taught, right? So recently, and I'm going to switch some things here, but the 6 and 7 there's just 2 little paragraphs in the book, right? And so they used to be very, these are the weaker steps, right? But in actuality, I've studied it to know that, it is surrender on a daily basis that's in 6 and 7, right? And previously, with my sponsor, we had always talked about the character defects that have come up in my 4th and 5th step. I used to think, I know more about myself, but when you go home for that hour and you meditate, it says that you know more about God, not about you, right? So that you're happy and that you've learned more about what His will is for you. And so you go into 6 and 7, and I always care, I thought, okay, this is where I get to get rid of all this stuff, and this is where but remember, I hadn't accepted all of me, good and bad, until my 7th year. And that means I couldn't even be with you. I would be terrified to be up here talking to you, especially because you're hoity queens from Dallas, But, I've learned that some of you love me, and, even though my story is mostly told on a dark winter's night, I know some of your hearts are as dark as that, so I feel at home. So 6 and 7, what she told me was that what it really says is that you have to offer the good and the bad. And so I needed to concentrate on the good. And in previous years, decades, I had really concentrated on just the character defects. And I read good, but I just, it's like, the good part. And she literally said you have to write down the good part of yourself, and you have to offer that part up as well. And so that was really a flip. It really flipped it on its head for me when she said that. So I try to do that on a daily basis. Like, what is the good that I can offer today? Not keep me from the bad, but what can I move forward with the good? So that has been instrumental fairly recently. And then in the men's process, I'm the type of person who can offend a whole room of people. Right? I don't just offend a little, like when I step into it, even years sober, it is a bit, And so I have done that a couple of times, and more than a couple. But there's this couple who I met when I came back, and they were teaching me all these things, and we do big book study, and I had offended them in their home. Right? And literally she had yelled at me. And then I had gone to an event with him, and he ignored me. Like, he would just walk away from me. And so I knew, it was, how it says in the 12 and 12 where sometimes our agenda or, our basic instincts that we can be run, driven powerfully, blindly, sometimes subtly. Well, sometimes that blindly is true for me. And so I had offended these 2 people who I love and adore. And so I had to go and do the work around it, and I had to make amends to them. And what she said to me, he was very like, just ask me, because I said, what else can I do? And he said, nothing, you've already done it, and hugged me, right? So that was helpful, but not as helpful what she said to me. And what she said to me is, I know you're going to want to walk away from this group. I know your alcoholism is going to tell you to run. And what I want you to do is stay seated at the table, right? Which, was very that was her being graceful to me. And I remember going back, they live in a ranch, and so I drove back to the ranch. I'm actually willing to drive an hour for a big book study every week and an hour back to Austin every week. So, and they appreciate that, and they know that those of us that are doing that, they know we're doing that. And so I drove up and I said, I still didn't feel completely comfortable. And so I texted him and I said, hey, I really don't want to come into your house if you're not good with me, right? If I don't have to come to this meeting. And what my alcoholism had said is, oh, I was the black sheep of my family, and now I'm the black sheep of this chosen AA family, and so I need to go find another AA family, and who would that be? Like all of that. And so he just said, "Come on in, brother," right? And so I went in, and we ended up remodeling their kitchen and doing all this stuff. And she got very upset. Like she would say "MF mother" to me, right? And then he'd say, "We don't call Mr. Bravo that." Right. And so, and what I said to him when he came, he sort of was apologizing for her behavior because she was really going off the deep end. And I said, look, she has a wedding coming up. She and I are like sisters, and she can call me whatever she wants. Right. And he really, really appreciated that. He really, because I didn't take the bait. Right. I'm like, we're going to get through and we're closer than we've ever been. So, staying seated at the table, even when it's uncomfortable. I didn't know that. I always ran, or I lied and ran, or I stole and ran, or I, whatever, but I ran. And so, being able to tell other sponsees and things, like when they're in uncomfortable situations or whatever, to stay seated at the table, what a gift is that? That's so powerful to say you can get through this. Stay seated in AA. Stay seated at your job. Stay seated. Just like someone at the panel was saying that he gets uncomfortable and has to pray before he goes into a meeting. It's like, but stay seated at the meeting, right? Because it will pass. And so, what I learned from that is that I can really still walk through people's lives and be current wreckage. But there's a way to get through that. I had a situation where an employee kept telling me, "Hey, we usually don't buy this when we're doing specification work." And I'm like, "No, we can do it." It was wool carpet. I wanted to make the money. It was like $10,000 or something at the time, and the builder called me and said, "You stole this money from me. I should have been the one that bought this," right? And he's a huge builder in town. And so I went there. I did the work around that, and I went there. And I said, I owe you a financial amends, and sometimes I'm blinded by what I'm doing, and I want you to let you know that this is not on my company. This is specifically me and under my direction that we did this to your company. And so he sort of stood up. He looked shocked, and he sort of stood up and he said, "Well, I think my office manager can handle this." And I said, "Well, I have my checkbook, and I can write the check. Just tell me the amount." And he left. Right. Well, then he called a meeting about windows, and he usually sat there, and I sat here. It was a big board room table, and he sat down next to me, and he said, "Hey, this is all on me, and I just want he literally used my words of financial amends in that meeting about the windows, and took full responsibility of why we hadn't done the meeting yet. And at the moment, I knew he got it. Like he understood that, beyond financial amends, this was a spiritual, like he knew I understood what I had done, and he was taking responsibility like he had seen me take responsibility. That's not me, right? That I don't have the courage to go in and do those things, but yet I do, right? I had a situation fairly recently where a client told me, she came back into town, she's like, "I don't like the stain, and the front door was left open." Right? And I'm like, okay, my assistant, I had to text her. I'm like, why did the door was left open. And so I went and talked to her, and I'd said, "Don't worry, we'll take care of it," right? Well, she said it to me on a Sunday night. I slept on it, even though I had that fear start to come up. This is like, $200,000 job. And so I text her that in the morning. I'm like, "I'm coming your way. I'm going to be there, blah, 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 blah." And so I said, "We'll take care of it. Don't worry about it." And I walked in, and she's like, "Hey, how are you?" And I said, "I'm sorry about the front door." And she goes, "Oh, if you don't latch the other door, it blows open. We do it all the time. Don't worry about it. I just want to let you know that it was, that happened." So I'm like, okay. And then we started looking at the stain, and she's like, "I don't really like it, blah, blah, blah." I go, "Okay, well, this is what we can do." And she's like, "I just felt so good whenever you said we'll take care of it. That just meant so much to me. So why don't you, do what you need to do?" And then she left. So it's me that causes that issue, right? It's like I think you're going to react like I do, which is, cunning, baffling, and powerful, right? And yet everyone else has this capacity to be understanding and all those other things, which I deny that you have that, right? In my mind. And so I left there, and then I went to this other meeting, and these two guys start arguing, like the owner of the house and the flooring guy start arguing, and he goes, "Get out of my house," and he throws him out of his house, and so I actually had to mediate between the owner of that company and my client and the floor, and I was like, what is this? How did I end up being the person that has the capacity to be the mediator in this situation, So I told you at the beginning that, me not being able to hold a bat and everyone laughing at me and being that little kid and being that little fat kid, they all knew I was different, right? And it seemed like all my entire life, people knew that I was different. What this program has allowed me to do is accept that. Today I can laugh that I'm the fat sissy boy, right? That I don't know how to do. I mean, literally, we have a fundraiser that's bowling, and guess who won the worst bowler year after year? Like, literally, I'm bowling and looking back, and everyone's laughing, right? Because I'm the worst, and I know I'm the worst. I can't even begin to tell you how bad I am about that stuff, right? And so, I can laugh at myself now, right? Now, someone asked me to go to Camp Gladiator, and I couldn't handle that pressure because, of course, I'm the last one going, as we're running through the park. I'm like, okay, this is way too much, right? But being with you and laughing with me, I can do that. Most of you know me to the point where there are buttons and levers to push to watch me become animated, about things. And I know where those buttons and levers are on you, right? I can say a few things, and there's a friend of mine that we won't mention, Patrick, and he goes into complete animation. And then about maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes in, he's like, "Oh, I know what you're doing," right? And I'm just watching the show. I'm like, "Yeah, tell me more. What about her? What about the, So anyway, it's part of our deep friendship that we use each other that way. So what I want to say is that, it says he reached for, I'm paraphrasing, but he reached for a higher power and then he knew, and it has to be in that order, right? I have to reach for a higher power before I know myself. I always thought I needed to do all this stuff to learn more about me, and I do need to learn more about where my character defects and things show up. But really, I just need to get out of the way and let my higher power tell me where I need to be and what I need to do. Like when Brandon asked me, I said, "Of course I'll come and talk to you," right? That's not normal. I mean, he asked me that, and to be honest, 2 other people that same week asked me to tell my story. One was an hour south of me. One was on Zoom. I talked to a friend who used to live here. Some of you may know who he is, but I won't mention his name because he may not be as popular as I am. But I reached out to him and he said, "Hey, are you still sober?" And I said, "Of course I'm still sober. I saw the boy version of you and I thought maybe you want to talk, right?" And so he said, "Well, why don't we talk tomorrow at noon?" And I'm like, "Okay, like noon my time?" Yes, he's in California. He's like, "Okay, well, here's the code for Zoom and you're telling your story." Right? And so I thought we were having a one-on-one. I thought we were going to be spiritual with one another and all that. Instead, I had to tell my story, right? So, and then I started thinking about it. It's like, well, maybe this is right. Maybe I tell a story on Zoom. Maybe I go to these hillbillies who I feel uncomfortable, in Dripping Springs or Driftwood or wherever the hell that was, to tell these people this story, and they got it, just like the people in Fort Worth, just like I was traveling in Europe one time, and my little niece and my cousin were there in this restaurant in Bellagio, Italy, and it was a beautiful night and everything. And the owner came over and said, "What do you want to drink?" And I said, "Oh, I'll just have water." And he said, "Is it a program?" Right? And I said, "Yes." And so then he walked around, and it was just he and I. And I've had several moments like this where it's almost like the room goes quiet, and you can talk to someone across in a spiritual way. And he said, "I have 8 years. I have to drive down here to do a meeting," right? And so he brought me all kinds of food that night and all these things. And my cousin's like, what's happening, right? Because it was like this glorious night with this other alcoholic who, he got me and I got him, and we could talk across the room without, they didn't even know we had had that conversation, right? So I just think it's a beautiful thing that we can see each other. And that's what I mean, that we can see each other, right? I saw him, he saw me, you can go anywhere in the world. Anyone that's new here that thinks that this is like your Dallas community, this is your AA, it's not. The whole world is your community now. When someone was saying earlier about you don't know what's so beautiful that's going to come your way, or you don't know what's in your future. I know people. I have a cousin who's completely. He got a liver somehow. I think black market, because I have some family like that. But he got a liver, and he's still drinking, right? And his wife is gregarious and fun and a redhead, and I know if they came in, they would meet people that they enjoyed, and people would enjoy them. But they don't know that. Right? The only thing they know is the lifestyle they know. So I would say this: be grateful that you're here tonight. Take what you can, leave the rest. If you have to write an amends or write a 4-step about me, Steve, finally, then you can go do it. Get to the other side of it. Make those amends. And the amends part of it is where we take what we've learned with all the other steps, because literally it's been writing about me, talking about me, going to God about me, all the way through. It's not until you get to 8 and 9 that you take those principles that you've learned and you go out in the world and you demonstrate that to another person. That's where it becomes less of a therapy and into something that's tangible, because you're now demonstrating what you've learned about yourself. So I hope that you all get through the steps. I hope that you guys redo the steps if you need to. Do your 6 and 7 in the morning. Surrender to the fact that you're offering good and bad to your higher power on a daily basis. I used to put that aside. It is now 6 and 7 are very active for me now, right? I breathe into a bowl of water, hot water from sinuses. An Indian doctor told me to do that. And when I have that face in there with that steam going, I say the Serenity Prayer. Right? And then I start my day. So it's like a little ritual that I do. So find your ritual. Find what centers you in the morning and move through your day, with your antenna up. So you're listening to your higher power. So that's all I have. I think I'm a little shy of 5 minutes. So thank you for having me. Congratulations on your year anniversary. You're all beautiful people, as far as I can tell. So... So have a good night. Thanks for having me.